Hi guys, this is TAGG again, and today I want to go over a bit of a different thing. It's not really that much overclocking related. I want to take you on a bit of a, let's say, shopping tour of capacitors. So let's pull up capacitors. Now, the point of this video is basically to put together a assortment where you can both mod and replace most capacitors on older motherboards. Uh, so I want to split this into more or less 2.5 categories. So aluminium polymers, MLCCs, and SP caps, the SMD polymers from Panasonic, basically. So, anyways, let's get started with uh, aluminum polymers. Let's select axial, one that stands straight up. No, radial is the wrong one. Uh, Now, most voltage rails on your motherboard that are not, well, I say most, in a vast majority of the case, all rails are at less than 5 volts, except the 12-volt rail, of course. I'm talking desktop stuff, not laptops, where you have some weird voltages. Anyways, uh, what I would recommend here is 820 microfarads, and let's just apply the filters and see what comes out of it. Um, I use Nishikon FP series, and there we have the first one, 60 cents a piece. Open it. There's a little detail here. 8 milliohms. There's a huge difference here. For example, these KMET ones here have 13 milliohms ESR. Now you want low ESR, but not to a point, well, there's another reason for that. But there is 7 milliohm ESR Nishikon FP caps. However, you don't want those if you want to limit like your selection of capacitors to as few different models as possible, because they are taller. I bought some of them. They are, I think, 10 millimeters tall. And the point here is that on Intel boards, well, AMD boards as well. Anyways, you have a keep out zone basically around the socket where you have to keep the height to a certain limit. And usually on boards, let's pull up the favorite example of from me, the Rampage Extreme X48 images. There we go. You have these caps here. Those are 8 millimeter heights. So 8 millimeter fits everywhere. So I would recommend getting 8 millimeter height, 820 microfarad, 6.3 volts rated Nishikon FP caps. Now there's another important thing which they don't show us, but I know from experience is the lead spacing on those things. Now let's pull up one that has this. Also important if you look for caps. Let's pull up this one. This is probably going to be the wrong one because Kemet always cheaps out on stuff. No lead spacing. Great. I want to show something and they don't show the information I need. That is also not good. That is 5 millimeter lead spacing. We want 3.5 millimeter lead spacing. Now I know those Nishikons we had. Let's pull up the expensive Nishikons. Maybe they have it. Exactly here. 3.5 millimeter lead spacing is what we want for these capacitance rated ones, because most of them, like again, Rampage Extreme, these are all 3.5 millimeter lead spacing. And on older boards, let's pull up something else. Good example. I know one. P4P800. this is a good example for this. Here you can see these ones here are, I think on the P5 P4P they are either 2200 microfarad or 3300 microfarad aluminum electrolytics, so regular electrolytics. You can also replace those with these because they have the same lead spacing. The expensive ones. Where's the cheap ones I wanted to recommend? Here. So that's basically a universal replacement for all of the smaller caps on older boards. Like Pentium 4 series, some Athlon XP boards, some minor caps on like socket 370 boards. Let's pull up something like, what is a good board from socket 370? 2C. Pull up one of those. Tiny. I want something bigger. Yeah, that is also not good. Is this so tiny? Can we get a proper picture? eBay? Yeah. Anyways, on these you can see those capacitors, the main filter capacitors for memory and CPU are bigger. However, you can still use those 820s to replace minor capacitors, for example, Northbridge filtering here. So they are useful for basically all generations of motherboards. That's my first pick. Now let's continue to the second pick I would recommend. Get out. Those are the 1500. Let's do bigger then. Maybe they don't have the 1500s in stock right now. Okay. Now there is a capmod again. Let's click this one. Maybe this one has the lead spacing this time. No. Usually those have 3.5 millimeters. Anyways, not my recommendation. Anyways, don't worry. My recommendation is not here. Why is it not here? See what the Panasonic can do. In that case, I was looking for. Oh, it is here. Never mind. That should be the right one. Nishikon 5mm lead spacing, as you can see here. Now, 1500s are usually the best price performance compromise on these, I would say. Now, again, they are more useful for replacing. It's amazing for zooming in stuff. For replacing the big capacitors on really old hardware. So these are 3300 microfarad electrolytics again. On the Total 2C, it's just example again. You can replace all or populate all 7 of those pads with them. And you can also use them on the input filtering because they are 6.3 volt rated and socket 370 runs the VRM of 5 volts. So there's that. Very versatile capacitors. So 1500s, get some of those for your really old stuff. If you only do modern stuff, don't. Now, those are the two main ones. Multiple values, I don't want that. Now, let's see, do we have lead spacing here? Do not, because Mauser says no, okay. Huh. There is also an argument to be made to get some, let's select this. Smaller diameter. To get some smaller diameter capacitors just for putting behind GPUs. Let's see what this Panasonic can do. It being expensive, I guess. 7 milliohms. Um, 2.5 millimeter lead spacing is what we want. So even smaller lead spacing. Now, these capacitors are made mainly for putting on the back of GPUs. Actually, let me see quickly if I can find something for you to show you this. What I exactly mean when I say putting behind GPUs. Yes, like this. This is the back of directly behind the GPU core of a GTX 285. Now, 2.5 millimeter lead spacing has also another advantage. Actually, yes, I'm going to do a correction after this, showing you the picture, because there's another important thing here. 2.5 millimeter lead spacing fits almost perfectly across these 08, 05 MLCCs that are usually used at the back of the GPUs. So you can basically piggyback the capacitor on the MLCC. So that's why I would recommend getting some 2.5 millimeter lead spacing capacitors. Now, I just noticed my mistake here. Let's remove these and these. I think 6.3 was actually too big. I want actually 5 millimeter ones and 2.5 volts. Because you're going to use these only on the backs of GPUs anyways, basically. They are not there to replace capacitors in older motherboards or anything like that. So and GPUs usually run at rather low voltages. Even GPU memory runs at below 2.5 volts in most cases, unless you have something really old, in which case you can use the bulkier capacitors anyways. So we got the smaller ones. Let's see, Nishikon. Get something cheap here. Guess Nishikon 60 cents a piece. Capacitor prices aren't exactly good at the moment. So we have 2 millimeter lead spacing. That is a bit too narrow actually. Ah. Maybe these? It seems like the 5 millimeter package is 2 millimeter lead spacing. So actually get the 6.3 millimeter package with the 2.5 lead spacing. Didn't know that before. Seems like I just fit a 2 millimeter lead spacing stuff on pads where 2.5 should be. Now, considering I didn't notice it making a difference, maybe get the 2 millimeter, I don't know. Anyways, here is also a Nishikon one for 55 cents or 54 cents rather. That's 2.5 millimeter, 6.3. It's a pretty tall one though. And ESR, what is ESR? 7 milliohms. So with those, I would say go for the 7 milliohms. That 1 milliohm might make a difference with GPU cores actually. So that's the last pick I have for aluminum polymers. Unless you want 16 volt ones. I'm going to quickly go over 16 volt, I guess. Blah blah blah. Remove this one. This one. Now we want 16 volt and diameter. 1000 microfarad. Apply filters. Here, get not this one. Tense. I did something wrong here, didn't I? Where is my voltage gone? It was. Okay, there we are. Now you can get cheap ones for those. It's basically not a mod I would recommend to do anyways on this old stuff. That's just get the 5 mm lead spacing. Now, what I want to basically tell you here is let's get something like I don't know, Asus P4T is a good one. That is definitely not what I wanted. Their resolution image. Now, these capacitors I would only recommend for replacements basically. So no cap mods, input filtering cap mods don't bring you that much. But you have here the 3 capacitors for input filtering. And on older stuff they sometimes just leak and swell up. So I would use 1000 microfarads, 16 volt rated ones for those. Now, here I don't really care about ESR that much because it's going to be better than the electrolytics that were on there, and it doesn't make too much of a difference from my experience in terms of ripple. So that's that. Anyways, let's continue to MLCCs. Now, the most important part about your MLCCs is basically the form factor, and that's about it. Form factor, capacitance, there is no like different ESR values as much. You just sort of expect it to be of a certain value. And that certain value is always lower than on aluminum polymers. So it's the lowest ESR stuff you can get basically. Anyways, or 805 47 microfarads is the first pick I would take. Um, Now, 0805 is already pretty small, and I think for some it might be the smallest size you would want to bother with. Now, MLCCs are basically something you would put on the backs of your North Bridge, for example, or on the back of video memory on a graphics card. It's not really something you replace, it's something you add on to stuff. Microphone cutout, sorry. I need to fix that thing. Now let's basically just look for the lowest price here. I think that one is actually pretty good. That's 4 volt. Go. 0805, 47 microfarads. Get a bunch of those. Slap them on the back of memory chips. Should be good enough. Now, I use some 1206s on my Rampage Extremes, and some might say 1206 is a bit too big, and yeah, I kind of agree. Characteristics are not going to be as good for high frequency as on your 805s, of course. But I like to get a set of 100 microfarads or 806 to just have them, for example, for putting them on the back of 3.5 millimeter lead spacing capacitors, for putting them on stuff like the output filtering on North Bridge on the Rampage Extreme, stuff like that. Let's find one that is like 27 cents when you buy 100 of them. Basically, something like this. Also, always check that the characteristics here are marked as X5R just to be safe. Those are basically more temperature stable than most other ones. But also X5R is basically the standard these days anyway, so just double check. Get some 100 microfarads if you want them. they are not really useful for super modern hardware, I would say. If you run more modern stuff like modern GPUs, like let's say the GTX 500 series or newer, I would maybe substitute the 08 of 1605 ones you want, 1206 ones with some 0603 ones and just get some the voltage rating. I don't want that. Get some 22 microfarad 0603 ones. Those are really tiny, but they're really useful for memory or like North bridges. Like as you can see, they're pretty cheap. 7 cents a piece if you buy 100, so €7 for 100 pieces of them, and then you can spend your whole afternoon putting caps everywhere, basically. So that's another recommendation. So these three MLCC types, uh, the three aluminum polymers, plus the 16 volts if you need them, uh, basically have you good to go for almost everything. Now, I want to mention one more thing, and that's going to be obviously SP caps. The I think Billiard called it rectangle good, circle bad, or something like that. Uh, it's in polymer capacitors, SMD, and then just click on 3 milliohm ESR. That's the only reason you want them. Crazy low ESR and also really low ESL because they don't have legs basically. Let me show you. They are these little rectangles with tabs on either side. Actually, some of them have 3 tabs. KMET, we don't want KMET. We want Panasonic and 2.5 volt rated ones. So this is what we want. Actually, 3 tab as you see. Now, these are basically the best aluminum polymer capacitor you can find. Period. And those are basically capacitors you want to directly slap on the back of your GPU core if you run GPUs. If you run CPUs, I just again maybe don't orient your capacitor mods too much on what I do, because I basically take these from old MSI Lightning cards that someone else killed and then take 3 of them and put them on the back of a P5E3 Premium. I have a couple of those, and they have pads for those. Let me see if I can find a picture. Really should prepare these videos better. Oh well. Anyways, there is 3 pads behind the socket where you can put these. That's what I use them for. Also, I use them on my Rampage Extremes to replace several capacitors on there. There I actually use the new ones, so they are, I would say, somewhat limited in their applications because you either have to have the pads with the right spacing, or you can scratch the board yourself and make pads for them. So I'm going to show you an example of this if I can find it. I actually did this on a couple of boards, so let's open this one. This is an example of putting them on pads that are designed for this type of package. This is a P4 C800E Deluxe socket 478. I put 3 directly behind the socket, 2 more here. They're all on vCore. But that's not what I'm here for. I actually wanted to show you picture where I made the pads myself, because that's also an option with those. Did I put it? Now, finding two power planes that are next to each other close enough and are the right ones is pretty hard depending on board, obviously, but I'm still not sure if I found it, what I was looking for. Look good. This could be it. Yes, here we are. Beautiful. Now, here you can see pads I created myself basically with those. Now this board is a 8-bit TH7. That's socket 423, first generation Pentium 4. Now here 8-bit designed it in a way that these planes here are vCore, and there's a huge ground plane all behind the socket. So basically I put the grounds here and all the vCore ones here. So you can create your own pads for these, but just keep in mind they're not as versatile as, for example, the 470 microfarad 7 milliohm ESR 2.5 millimeter lead spacing ones I showed you before. So that's basically the extra pick for I would say a different capacitor type. Although you might argue it's just aluminum polymer, but in a SMD package. Anyways, that's what I would get to get started with old mods. Again, I kind of mentioned which stuff you want for older stuff and which ones you want for newer stuff. And somewhere in between those picks, you can probably find something that fits the hardware you want to run. I hope this helped. Bye.